Good morning.
Good morning.
Got your Bible with you this morning? Take it out and turn to 1 Kings chapter 11. 1 Kings chapter 11. That's where we're going to be this morning. Well, we're going to be all over the place, really. We're going to wrap up our study today of Proverbs. And if you've been following along and reading Proverbs at home on your own, you have read through Proverbs more than once by now. You have undoubtedly contemplated deep matters. And you've gone about your life, and no doubt you've seen things and understood things. You've looked at ants differently now than you have before. You've talked about your study of Proverbs with your friends and family. I mean, that's what you do, right? I mean, you're going through life, and it's like, man, I just got this heavy thing. I just understood this. This is amazing. And maybe you've had a similar experience to what I have. I mean, you've been talking to a friend of yours, and you're telling them about this wonderful sermon series and these wise sayings of wise men of Israel. And you're talking about, how interesting this study is, and all these things you've learned from Proverbs, things you've never thought of before. You never thought Proverbs, for example, would ever be interesting and engaging, and it is. And your friend looks at you, and they're awfully puzzled, and you can tell they're troubled, they're thinking about something, and they ask you a question. They say, well, if Solomon was so wise, why in the world did he do such dumb things? Now, you're just a moment ago talking to them, paraphrasing what the Bible says, talking about wisdom and about all the practical applications of wisdom, and you did bring up, that Solomon was the wisest man to ever live, and your friend is picking a friendly fight with you. It feels like they're picking a fight with the Bible, and you got to start defending it because, you were just quoting the Bible, and they're not agreeing with you. Like, 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 12. God here is, replying to Solomon's request for a discerning heart, and God says, I will do what you've asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart so that there will never, nor will there ever have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. So your friend hits you with something that you had not been thinking about. So in that moment, what do? I mean, you could ask them, are you serious? And you can answer them with, something you're not really prepared for. And you can give them an answer, and it'd probably be wrong, but they want to know. What do you say? Like I say, you could give them a flippant answer, and it's probably wrong in the moment. You might make a joke because you're not feeling very comfortable. You might just joke your way out of it. But you know what? You're having a good day. And you say, I really don't know. I'll have to get back with you on that. I think you should study about, and pray about that too, and think about that. Why did he do such dumb things? And you encourage your friend to study and get back to you, and of course that's what you do. You study it, you think about it, and you ponder it. You take all this wisdom we've been talking about in Proverbs, and you're like, I have no idea what he's talking about. You have to admit, you're a little bit fuzzy about the details of what your friend's been talking about, because you've been looking at Proverbs, and you didn't see it in there in Proverbs what they're talking about. So with a little bit of help from Google, you go and you find something in the Bible, and you get your Bible out and you start reading in 1 Kings chapter 11, where your Bible's turned. Starting in verse 1. It says, King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told Israel, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts away from their gods. Turn your hearts away after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth, and 300 concubines. And his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. On the hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Shemoth, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. And you read that. You're like, I kind of remember something, but you just, we're studying Proverbs, the why, and you're crushed, dumbfounded. How could he? How could he do that? But what do you do when your teacher is found guilty for doing what he taught you not to do? You remember clearly the lessons that he taught you. He said, don't do this. It's not wise. And then he does it. It's in the Bible. It's not a joke. So first you're in denial. It takes you a little bit of time, and to process this information. And sometimes when we're hit with things like this, we get angry. We think about it. Is this the same man we listened to? We took very seriously his words in Proverbs. We took all of his words very seriously. Does this mean that everything he said, everything that he taught us, does it mean that's a lie? In the case of Solomon, does this undermine the wisdom taught in the Bible, that the person who was giving us the wisdom did what he did? Why did his wisdom not save him? Why did his wisdom, in all of his wisdom, why did he do what he did? Why didn't his wisdom, his knowledge, keep him from going the way of folly? He instructed us clearly, do not go the way of folly. And that's what he did. He said, listen to Lady Wisdom. Love Lady Wisdom. Go home with Lady Wisdom. Go into her house. Live with her. And he made his bed with that evil seductress, Madam Fowler. The guy who gets most of the credit for Proverbs did that. He did what he told us not. Why didn't Solomon's wisdom keep him from doing that? Why didn't it save him? Well, for at least one clue, let's look a little closer at something in 1 Kings chapter 3. It's in these verses that lead up to the ones that we just read before. That classic, that powerful, those verses that where God, Solomon asks God, and God, gives him what he asked for, gives him the discerning heart. So starting in verse 1, it says in 1 Kings chapter 3. So Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the walls surrounding Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because a temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given to him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. Now Solomon knew what God wanted. He was taught that God wanted him to do certain things, certain ways. He knew that God did not want him to sacrifice on those high places. But he did it anyway. I mean, back in verse 1, it says there that he married a foreign wife. And I'm sure it made sense to him. I mean, I'm sure she was beautiful, but more than that, it was probably a political strategy. He did it because he wanted to, he wanted to accomplish his goals. He did it so that he could, keep up his, his persona. He could go about and do what he wanted. And God was okay with this. It seems like that. I mean, just a few verses later there, just right on the same page in my Bible, that's where God grants him the request of wisdom. It appears that this was Solomon's first wife. It was the wife of his youth, if we connect that with Proverbs. But why did it not stop there? Well, do you guys know what this is? Absolutely, right? I know it's a gateway carbonated beverage, right? So that's what you were thinking, right? I'm sure it was. It's a gateway carbonated beverage. I mean, you thought it was a mini Sprite, but I suppose, I see things a little bit differently than most people. My story goes something like this. I used to think that I was a pretty rational guy, that I used logic and reason to make my decisions. I pay attention to the details, I pay attention to what's going on around me, I pick up the little parts and the clues and I put them together, and I think I figure things out, and I think I'm right. Just ask anybody. So I hear my dentist say that, the acid in soda and orange juice and all those other things, he had a great list, that the things I've been drinking, it was bad for my teeth. So I'm like, okay. And then I hear people talking about, the sugar in soda and how that's, it's really bad for your body. So I've been, that doesn't sound good. And I find that I'm addicted to the caffeine and the sugar mix in the soda. And I find myself using words and phrases that, I could really use whatever right now. And I'm like, that's the same kind of language an alcoholic uses, So I'm like, I could really use a drink right now. So I quit drinking soda. I did. I quit drinking soda for years. I don't remember how many years, but it was a long time. Yeah, I'm using the word was, right? So there's something, you go out for a meal, and what do you have? I'll just have water. A little bit of lemon, but just give me water. For years. But then one day I walked into this fast food place, and I'm like, I have been drinking water for a long time, and some of that water is not very good. I mean, they give you that city water. It tastes like, don't get you started. Maybe today I'll just have a Sprite. It's just one. It won't hurt. But that's how it starts. A Sprite led to a root beer. I have to admit it. It did. The root beer led to a Mellow Yellow. And the next thing I knew I was drinking a Mountain Dew for breakfast. And why do I do that? Why do I do something that I know is bad for me? Why? I mean, I'm disgusted with myself. And at some point, the soda and the sugar and the acid, all that messes up with my body. I start getting indigestion, heartburn, bloating. I add a few pounds. And I say, God, why? Why can't you just make something for me to drink that doesn't hurt me? And he says, I did. I made water. Why can't you make something that I actually want? I mean, that's, And there you have it. Why do I keep going back to the Mountain Dews of this world? It's because I want to. I don't really want the indigestion, but I want the Mountain Dew. Why do I clearly just decide to go with what I know I shouldn't have? Why don't I eat celery and carrot sticks all the time? It's because I don't want to. I want steak or pancakes. Or maybe a butter burger with cheese and some bacon, and just simple, maybe. Does Solomon, why does he have have so many wives? I mean, obviously he's going against the Lord's commands. I mean, it's clearly not wise, even though he's the wisest man alive. It's because he wants to. His wisdom was not enough. Super wise Solomon was not wise enough. He still knew better, and he still did it. His wisdom was not enough. Not enough to overcome his lust, his greed, his fascination with all the world's problems he was trying to figure out, his insatiable desire for more wisdom. Wisdom he set out to acquire. With his own words, he says, he acquired it at any cost. And it had a cost. Solomon, he paid it all for that. What happened to situational prevention, right? We were read through Proverbs, we learned about that. I mean, Solomon, what happened to your wisdom there? Did he not know the scriptures? Deuteronomy 17:17. God was giving instruction to Israel about the kings that they would have in the future. And he says, they must not take many wives. The king must not, or his heart will be led astray. Solomon went down that street in that town. He went to her house on that street. He went and ate her food. How could he? He knew better. He was the one who told us, don't do that, and he did it. Why did he do it? Well, the obvious answer is because he wanted to. He had these desires, and he wanted to fulfill his desires. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 10. There you go. It said, in his search for wisdom, he says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. He justified his actions by doing what he wanted to do, his desire, so that he said he could gain more wisdom. If you keep reading in the context there, what is going through your head? What's going through my head when I totally disregard a command from God? Solomon wanted what he wanted more than he wanted the Lord. Solomon wanted what he wanted more than he wanted the Lord. And that is hard to hear. You read, Proverbs and Psalms, Ecclesiastes, it's just that guy. It is hard to process that. The author of so many wise sayings in your Bible chose not to listen to the very same words of wisdom that he gave. And if Solomon could choose to do that, if wisdom was not enough to keep Solomon from turning his heart from God, what hope is there for me? Well, what hope is there for us? I mean, sure, I've studied Proverbs, but really I'm not that wise. I mean, I've studied, but I'll be honest, the title will say The Wise, it'll say Jason Meehan, but it's not, I'm not that wise. I am not as great as Solomon. But I know somebody who is. Great. Matthew chapter 12. Some of the Pharisees are teachers of law, are pressing Jesus. They want to know a sign. Why can't we have a sign from you, Jesus? You're supposed to be something great. And in Jesus' discourse, explaining to them, why you aren't going to get a sign, Jesus explains to them that he says the Queen of Sheba will stand up against this generation on Judgment Day and condemn it. For she came from a distant land to hear the words of Solomon. Now, someone greater than Solomon is here, but you refuse to listen. Jesus and the writers of the New Testament and the scriptures, New Testament scriptures, have a lot to say about what we're talking about here with Solomon. Once Jesus was talking with a young man in Matthew chapter 19, and it's a little bit longer reading, but just to get you the context here. We got to kind of read all of it here, but starting in verse 16, Matthew chapter 19, just then, a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" "Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus replied. "There is only one who is good. If you want to enter life, keep the commandments." "Which ones?" he inquired. Jesus replied, "You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. Honor your father and mother, and love your neighbor as yourself." "All these I have kept," the young man said. "What do I still lack?" Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sad, because he had great wealth. And right there, at the end, he knew the truth. He was not uninformed. He had the knowledge, but he didn't want to do it. He didn't want what the Lord had more than what he had. But still, others come to the conclusion that they don't want any boundaries placed on them when it comes to telling them what they should or shouldn't do. There's a lot of us like that. Just don't tell me what to do. Whether it be, inappropriate use of drugs or alcohol or maybe your sexuality, there's a long list of things that are pretty serious. And it's much easier to ignore God and walk away from Him than to stay close, sometimes feel bad, and adjust one's behavior or lifestyle. We have an example of somebody like Demas in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. It says, Paul is saying, "Do your best to come to me quickly. For Demas, because he loved the world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica." Demas walked away from the Lord, deserted Paul, after being involved in ministry with him, with the Apostle Paul. Imagine what that had to be like. You doing ministry with Paul. You're sharing the gospel with this powerful speaker, observing miracles. And you just simply decide to leave it all behind. I think about Judas. He walked with Jesus and betrayed him for money. It may seem like, these people left the faith overnight, but no one wakes up in the morning and decides, today's the day. I'm just going to pick up and leave the Lord. I didn't think I was going to do it yesterday, but today I'm good. I'll do that. It's always something that's been brewing from over time. But it can happen to anyone. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 9. I'm familiar with this verse. "Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. For some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." What turned Solomon in the right path? Was it greed? Sure. Yeah. Was it being involved in all these foreign problems? Dealing with all these non-God-fearing people and making treaties and your life so connected with them? Sure. Was it corruption by the world because of these relationships brought about by greed? And some of these relationships were the marriages. He wanted, he got to keep, I thought this was interesting. He would keep track, kept track of these other countries, by his close connections with them, learned information about them. So that helped bring him down? Yeah. Was it lust? I mean, absolutely. Did the lust and the greed, and did that cause him to make steady compromises with the world? Without a doubt. You could not imagine, I don't think, that the Solomon of his old age, worshiping these idols, could ever be connected with the Solomon of his young age, writing all these words of wisdom. But it happened. And it happened slowly, perhaps imperceivable. You couldn't see it just looking at one moment. But he began slowly turning away from God. You know, Solomon's story could be the story for any of us, if we're not careful to persevere in the ways of God. Lust, greed, fascination with the world. I mean, we see all these cool things going on around us, and I want to be part of it. And those are all common human problems. We all have to deal with that. We've all seen people. I dare say we all know people, even from our church experience. People close to the Lord drift away due to worldly preoccupations, bad and ill-conceived relationships. It just, slowly your career can become your God. The job that no longer serves you, you can serve it. You may not have 1,000 wives, idol-worshiping wives, but outside of our own hearts and minds, we can have this endless stream of bad influences from places like our friends and our coworkers. Then there's like TV and movies and internet, and before you know it, prayer and attendance, they just slip away. Bad moral behavior gets excused, and ever so subtly, you may not see it at the moment, we turn less to God and more to the gods of this world. It's the road that Solomon walked. Meaning that great and wise Solomon, the one who said that the very best thing to do, the first and most important thing you should ever do, the most important thing to do is to fear the Lord, gain wisdom. That man, Solomon, died. Smothered in wealth and sex and power. He died a man whose heart was turned from God. We don't know. He might have repented, but we don't know. The number of wives and concubines Solomon had was crazy. He was unhappy with one wife, the first one God gave him, so he got another. And another, and another, and another, which he has a lust that which would never be satisfied with 1,000 women. If that isn't the overwhelming theme of our culture, the search for love, to fulfill your lustful desires, to gather more wealth and power, if that's not the theme of our culture, what is? Church, that can influence you in ways you can't even see. You can't even perceive. And clearly, Solomon was wise. God said so himself. But, no one can serve two masters. Not Solomon. Not us. Yet how many of us have followed the path of Solomon? The truth is, some people leave the faith because they don't want to live under the authority of Jesus. They don't. It's just, you're doing what you're doing, and you look over, and there's that Bible sitting on the shelf, and you're like, no. I want to sleep with her. I want to serve myself. I want to cheat that guy. I want to get that money in my pocket. I want what I want. And I want to do that. Yeah. And they walk away from Jesus. people walk away from Jesus by ditching Jesus' leadership, and they feel free. I mean, it's like this freeing feeling I've never felt before. They live however you want to live. And I think the final comment for this morning should come from Jesus. Luke chapter 9, verse 23. Luke chapter 9, verse 23. Jesus said, then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the world, the whole world, and yet forfeit their very self? Deny yourself. That was definitely not on Solomon's agenda. It wasn't. I mean, he paid the price. But how about you? How about me? Do we deny ourselves? Why did Solomon do it? How could he live such an evil life? How could he live so foolishly? Why was his wisdom not enough? Honestly, we don't know exactly for sure what's going through his head. But what is for sure is it can happen. It can happen to Solomon, and it can happen to you and to me. Maybe we don't see it happening at the time. Maybe somebody comes along and says, I've noticed something. And what do? We get angry. We get mad. We're like, I'm a business. Just a slow moving away. And eventually we find ourselves building idol temples and worshiping something that's not God, with our hearts far from God. So we wrap up this series here of Proverbs, looking at wisdom. We wrap this up with a warning that comes from the wise man Solomon's life. He's giving us some more wisdom. That great wisdom's not enough. Wisdom is not enough. We need to watch our heart. Where's your heart at? What condition's it in? Solomon's father, a man after God's own heart. But not Solomon. When we're talking about our physical bodies, wisdom says you need to go to a doctor and have your heart looked at from time to time. I don't think going to the doctor is ever really fun. It's not. I mean, it might be a day off from work, but it's not fun. You go there and you get your heart checked up, right? They work you, they poke you